You have found us, me, the podcast, and my fab guests who are everyday people. And together, here, we explore that's life, or is it? Cha-ching! Well, hi, David Munro Jones. Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast and talking to me today about yourself and your wife, Yvonne. And before I start getting inquisitive and my natural curious state, could you just, for the benefit of the listeners, give us a little bit of background about yourself?
Yes, and thank you very much, Kerrie, for inviting me along. So, without going into the full potted history, my main role, or my main two roles, I'm the operations director for the IAPC name, so I look after all things operational and accreditation, and I also run my own business, so I'm an executive and leadership coach and team coach and consultant, for want of a better description.
What is it about that word consultant? Everyone goes, ooh.
I always remember somebody saying, "What's the collective noun for a group of consultants?" An invoice.
I've never heard that before, but I love it. Love it. Brilliant. Well, thank you. And so can you give us a little bit of background about what we're talking about today? So what I know is that you're married to a very lovely lady called Yvonne, and she has, as you've just sort of explained before we hopped on to record, several conditions, but it all stems back to an eating disorder, which I believe is anorexia. That's I've got that right?
You do, yes. So, and we can talk about this sort of if it's around. So Yvonne and I met sort of umpteen years ago by fate, and Yvonne, when I met her, was never a big eater, so vegetarian, but everything was generally managed. But around about sort of like 4 or 5 years ago, it started to become noticeable that her weight was dropping. There were some other initial factors that were going on. So that she had issues sort of with IBS, and ultimately, and I'm sort of shortening this, and I'm sure we'll get into the detail. Ultimately, that ended up with her taking sort of like early retirement, sort of like from work, which ultimately then led to a couple of spells in an eating disorders clinic, which then led to other sort of medical complications, which ended up with a spell in ICU. She was discharged into sort of a nursing home at the time, or a care home at the time, I should say, for respite, with a plan so like for coming home. But due to a couple of other medical issues that came up during that time, and trips backwards and forwards to hospital, she ended up ultimately being discharged back into a nursing home, where she remains, and she's been in a nursing home now. If she's still there in October, it will be 3 years.
Gosh, that's a very, very long time. And tell me, looking back, can you recognize a trigger for this? Obviously, IBS, which is irritable bowel syndrome, is that linked to anything like stress, for example, or what was going on around that time?
The IBS, I think, from conversations that I've had with Yvonne, that she'd always had concerns about her weight of your way back to childhood. And I think from the conversations that we've had, it was definitely sort of like a childhood trauma in terms of not being allowed to leave the table unless she finished all of her food. So her dad was sort of encouraging her to eat everything, and her mother was trying to support her and go, look, like she can't eat anymore. Yvonne's the middle sister of three, and that childhood trauma more or less stayed with her. So at a point where nobody had really said to Yvonne, look, like, you've officially got an eating disorder, officially you've got anorexia. There was just that underpinning, worry about eating, worry about food, probably so general problems, so like with digestion, but nothing that would stop her from sort of like working. And she had like an incredibly successful career, which included sort of like British Steel, and then worked sort of moving into sort of like education, and she's been a job coach, and she's a trained counsellor and CBT, and a whole host of other things. But when the IBS started to get worse, and it was potentially triggered by the usual things of life that as you get older, a few more anxieties, a few more sort of like stressful moments. There wasn't what I would call like one like major trigger, like a major life event. It just started to creep up, and the more that she lost weight, and she had colonoscopies and endoscopies and MRI scans and CT scans and everything else, just to rule out the usual suspects. Eventually, that led to somebody saying, look, like, you need to go and start talking to somebody at the eating disorders clinic. And that's sort of like how we got onto that route.
I see. And did she was open to discussion? And because I get the feeling that you two still have wonderful communication open between the two of you. You talk a lot, very openly. But when she realized that she needed to talk about anorexia, was she open to that?
It was almost, to be honest, it was almost a relief. The first time that somebody, and I remember the meeting, there was me and Yvonne, a clinical nurse, and so like a doctor, who actually said to her, look, you're like, officially you do have an eating disorder, and officially you do have anorexia. And that was the first time that anybody had officially recognized it. So she's 68 now, 64-ish. Yeah, I have sort of like the two views on it, because on the one hand, it was great for somebody to acknowledge it, and the conversation in the car on the way home was very much like it's great now that somebody's recognised that like this is what it is. But at the same time, and only because of my thought processes, I'm always mindful of if you give somebody a label, do they hang on to it, and do they use that as like a defense mechanism and anything else? And there were, and I've had these conversations with Yvonne, so I'm not saying anything behind the back that I would equally add. So like I can't say that so like all of the conversations were smooth, but it was very much about, look, don't. From my perspective, it was right. Yes, you've been diagnosed with anorexia, but work with it rather than using it as I'm not going to do that because. And that was always my concern, because the point that somebody said, right, so if you've got an eating disorder, you've got anorexia, if you don't put weight on, so your health is going to suffer, which it ultimately did, and happy to talk about that, was not getting to the point of, right, okay, so like that's what it is. Let's address the underpinning reason for that being there, so like the psychological reason. So from my perspective, and just to put something into context, Yvonne is emotionally driven, and I'm cognitively driven. Yeah, so Yvonne lives with her feelings and her emotions. I live in my head. and that is probably one of the reasons why we really get on. But it also causes clashes. So from time to time, because I will always look to problem solve. So it's okay, right? Okay, so that's what you're saying it is. How do you fix it? And from Yvonne's point of view, it's right. Understand my feelings, and we'll talk about it, which is sort of where we're at. But in those initial stages, it was right. Okay, so so what happens? So where do we go with this? So Yvonne was open and appreciative of it being recognised. She wasn't particularly happy about what was going to come next.
Yeah, well, it must be extremely scary.
Yeah, it was. I mean, the first thing that they said, because she'd attended the sort of clinic. So you're like once a week, you're like every other week to be weighed, to talk about diet, talk about nutrition and everything else. And then they suggested that she should go to a place called Birchwater, like an eating disorders clinic, which is residential for a period of time, where they could provide support, correct diet, psychological interventions, and so on and so forth, in a sort of community setting. And we had a sort of a conversation around that, which was really driven by like anything that gets you well enough to function at home, and do all the things that you want. So she went for her first spell, which ultimately lasted for around about 3 months. And as I say, it's all residential, and then after a period of time, so you can come home at weekends. It's a bit like day release. You can come home for weekends, get reacclimatized to sort of coming home. So the 3 months sort of came and went. Yvonne came back home. It was okay for a period of time, but again, she started to sort of lose weight. And consequently, as you start to lose weight, and because she had also an issue with her back at that time, her mobility was starting to suffer a little bit, which meant that ultimately she had to use a walking frame, and then that would ultimately lead to being in a wheelchair while we were waiting for the surgeon to decide what they were going to do with a back injury. And that then led to another spell in the eating disorders clinic, which was for 6 months. And then she was again got to a point really in her own mind of saying, look, you've done as much as you can. I just want to go home and manage it myself. And that's where we got to around about just under 3 years ago.
Right. Gosh, what a journey, David. That's and how is she now?
Well, the continuation of that journey, and it's one of those things that I can talk about. She went in and it was residential, and so on and so forth. But there is that, when you drive anywhere, with a loved one, and it's not the same as just dropping them at the airport and thinking, right, they'll be back in a couple of days, in a week or so, at the train station. And you drive back home, so to an empty house, you're in the empty chairs, you're in everything else, and that sort of part of the journey, that sort of emptiness that you sort of carry with you, sort of continued. So on her return home, she was going to the eating disorder clinic once every couple of weeks. And she also had to go to the local doctor to have her blood pressure taken and weight and general checkup. So on one occasion we went, and Yvonne had said she wasn't feeling very well. We landed on a nurse a practitioner who, rightly or wrongly in my own mind, just didn't seem to be particularly bothered on that morning. And so I took Yvonne's blood pressure, asked Yvonne how she was. Yvonne said, she wasn't feeling particularly well. And nurse just said, well, just go home, take some paracetamol, and have a warm. So nothing, nothing was sort of flagged. That was Monday. Tuesday, Yvonne just said she wasn't very well. She didn't really want to get up. Tuesday afternoon, I helped her to go to the bathroom, and she fainted, which was the point that I thought, right, ambulance. Phoned the ambulance, and they said they would get there as soon as they could. Ring back if anything else happened. And Yvonne fainted again, but for a longer period of time. So I sort of rang them back. Anyway, she was admitted into hospital. Now, quick sidebar to that. Yvonne had been in and out of hospital for 2 or 3 days on an ongoing basis for anything to do with either magnesium or potassium. One of them being high, one of them being low. So my expectation at that point was that Yvonne would just go into hospital. It would be a couple of days, and they would deal with the magnesium and the potassium. So accordingly, it turned out that she had kidney stones, which needed an operation, which led to sepsis, which led to a spell on ICU. And then from there, it led to the sort of the ultimate discharge into the nursing home, with a view to using that for respite. So the ambulance turned up. They took her into hospital. Now the sidebar to that is that she'd been in and out of hospital, for 2 or 3 days on an ongoing sort of basis, due to either her magnesium or potassium levels. So my expectation was, okay, so you're low blood pressure, you're going to go in, it'll be a couple of days, they'll sort your magnesium or your potassium out, and then you'll be discharged. So that didn't happen, because they diagnosed that she had a kidney infection, and then diagnosed that she had kidney stones, which required an immediate operation, which led to developing sepsis, which led to about 4 or 5 days in ICU, and then moved down to another ward. And it was at that point that they said probably the best thing, rather than being discharged home, would be to be discharged to a rehabilitation centre, or a care home, just for a period of time until she could get her strength back and everything else, which is what happened. And then she was again backwards and forwards, into hospital. And then after another spell, it was decided that she needed, and even the care home was saying, Yvonne needs more nursing care now than she needs care. So she was discharged then into a nursing home, which is where she is now.
And she's there permanently now?
She's there until we can get her home. Getting a home requires a number of hoops and everything, but you could say it's permanent in the sense that she doesn't come home on day release, mainly because she's been bedridden for at least a couple of years, has consequently has mobility problems, can't stand on her own, and needs ongoing care. I would just add that the thinking about this as a journey, that's sort of part 2 of a 4-part story, because it sort of took a bit of a downhill turn December, because when Yvonne went into hospital, for the kidney stones and everything else, that was the week that we planned to go away, birthday celebrations, and a few other things. And then in December of last year, 4th of December of last year, things took an even bigger spiral downwards as well. So the journey's in a number of different stages.
So how are her spirits now?
Well, just picking up on December, because this will sort of put things into context. So Yvonne hadn't been very well over the weekend. 4th of December was a Monday, so I rang the care home nursing home to see how she was, because I visit every day, and would have on the phone regularly as well. So I rang them up and said, how is she? She said, she's not much better. So we've called an ambulance. Okay. So again, expectation, low potassium, low magnesium, a couple of days in hospital. Anyway, so they rang me back and they said the ambulance crew think it's end of life. Which I sort of went, sorry, and they said, look, we've called the doctor out to see what they say, and the doctor came out and said, this looks like end of life. And so so my entire world collapsed at that point, because all of my, as I was saying earlier, I live in my head. It was just so I took a chunk of time off, from work, and spent that time going in, going out, regularly helping her to eat, doing everything I could to try and bring her back, really. And there was one point, and Yvonne can't remember saying this, where I was saying to her the usual thing that I guess people in similar situations will say, please don't leave me, and everything else like that. And her response was, don't put me under that type of pressure. And I remember at the time that she said it, thinking, the two things, one, is that Yvonne just saying, let me go? Or is it just the fact that I'm, maybe being a little bit too, OTT? Anyway, she sort of rallied. A couple of weeks later, the nursing crew said, look, she seems to be getting stronger. We would anticipate that you will have a Christmas together, because 4th of December, there's already thoughts about gifts and cards and things. And she picked up, and whatever it was, and nobody really knows what it was. They just said, maybe she just had a bug of some description. Now, this is bearing in mind that she's caught MRSA and she's caught C. diff, from her trips to hospital. So she, because of her eating disorder, her immune system is just awful. So she's picked all sorts of stuff up from the hospitals, before, and it gets her down. But in terms of her spirits now, they do fluctuate depending upon other things that are going on. So if there's any sort of trauma with any of her two boys, that will affect her. Excuse me. But generally, she's as happy as anybody could be if you're stuck in a bed, not being able to do anything for yourself other than feed yourself and watch TV.
Right. Gosh, it must. I can't imagine how difficult, what goes without saying, for her, but also for you.
It changes on a number of levels. First, on a practical level, my sort of working day is completely different to what it was when Yvonne was at home. And when Yvonne was at home, she was going to help out with like different like business activities and everything else. So we had like lots of plans in place. But also when she was at home and and fully mobile, excuse me, then either one of us could walk the dogs, either one of us could go out and put the bird food out, and those sort of things. But then that stops, and and I don't want this to sound as if I'm playing the harp for myself, but when you have to do absolutely everything yourself, and I appreciate this is the same for other people in similar situations or people who live on their own, but all of a sudden it's right. I have to finish work at a certain period in time because I need to walk the dogs in order to get back in time to be able to visit Yvonne during visiting times. Do I need to pick up any shopping for us or anything else that needs to be done? Then I need to come back home. And as I say to everybody, so I come back home, feed the dogs, feed the outdoor creatures, feed myself, and then maybe watch a bit of TV. So my typical working day is completely different to what it was. Weekends are different. My sleep pattern is awful. My eating is probably just as bad. So everything changes because my focus is very much on I need to do that in order to be able to go and see Yvonne or at least give her a ring. So the sort of
practicalities. So your logistics,
yeah,
on a day-to-day basis. I can imagine.
And it's also if I want to go away, because I have an interest in photography, so I might go away for 2 or 3 days on a photography workshop. The planning and the coordination of that is it's almost like planning a major holiday, because it's making sure that Yvonne still gets visits, or at least people will ring if I'm away. So that's my immediate concern. I then have to book the dogs in to the dog sitter, which may sound quite simple, but you're sort of juggling 2 days. So you've got a date for the photography event, and then it's right, I can't book that until I know I can get the dogs in, but I need to book it in case it sort of gets sold out. So you're juggling. So it's juggling all these things.
Military operation.
And I'm saying you in the general sense, but I have a sense of I've been away a couple of times and I feel guilty every time I go, because I'm doing something that under any other circumstances Yvonne would be doing with me, or at least she would come along. And there have been many.
Yeah. And so, David, sorry to interrupt. How do you deal with that guilt?
I conceptualize it on one level, and then I just roll with it. On another. So I don't do as much as I probably would have done. If Yvonne was at home, and that's not to say that I would always be saying, right, that's it, I'm off. It's more about always thinking that, right, if I'm not visiting, there's no guarantee that anybody else will, because of one of our sons lives in Amsterdam, and our other son, has his own family commitments. So,
and tell me, with your sons, what's the effect of Yvonne and her journey? What has that had on them? And are they angry? Are they frustrated? Are they sympathetic? How has it manifested itself?
Yeah, and just as a point of clarification, they're Yvonne's sons, not mine. I've managed to sail through life without that responsibility. I would say at different stages they've gone through all of those emotions and more. we've had conversations, excuse me, around, could we have done something earlier? Could we have intervened in some other way? Was the time spent at the eating disorder clinic, worth it? If we hadn't done that, could we have just found a private psychologist, to do some, work? I think going back to December, when I had to ring everybody and say, right, just to let you know, I've been informed by the care home that, your mum, your sister, your cousin, they've said it's end of life, brings a lot of those emotions up. But I think that equally, it's almost expected rather than unexpected. It feels sometimes like you're just waiting for the phone call.
Yeah, well, that's understandable given the journey that you've just described. And your relationship together, I mean, obviously there's so much love there, but how has that got you, has the love got you through? Does it help, or because sometimes if seeing a loved one go through a journey or experiencing the journey together with them, I can't imagine because I haven't done that, but it must be brutal.
It has, I would say it has stages. If I was going to make a statement to anybody who's listening, is when you get to the point of acceptance, and I'm not saying that's an easy place to get to, but when you get to the point of acceptance where you accept things for what they are and how they are, and you deal with what is, not what might be or what was, it's a lot more comfortable.
Yes, that resonates and makes sense. And I have to ask you, just because of our profession, well, your profession of being a coach, has that helped?
It helps in the sense of knowing that you never know what's going on in somebody else's life. So never presume, never assume, never take anything for granted, because I will be the world's first, for people to say, how are things? And I will just automatically go, yeah, all right, when they're not. But nobody will know, because I don't wear my heart on a sleeve, to coin an expression. I live in my head. So the only person that really knows what's going on for me, is Yvonne, because we've known each other for that, for that period of time. And I think the other thing as well, from a coaching mentoring perspective, is recognizing that in an ideal world, and I've said this to many people, in an ideal world, your client will rock up. This is what I want to talk about. You'll talk about it. They'll go away and do it. And it's a bit like wash, rinse, repeat. But life gets in the way. Things happen, and that ability to switch from, okay, so you don't seem to be yourself. That, recognizing that, look, however you feel is how you feel. Don't let books and journals or anything else tell you. Just go with what is, yeah, and then worry about it. Afterwards, if you want to. And I find that I would like to think that I've always been able to make a connection with people, but I find now, and it's not just because Yvonne's in the care home, but in the care home, I see all of the other people that are in there as well. I see the private ambulance rock up, when somebody's passed, and I see the the thank you cards, or the references to funerals, or the how how other people are. And there are times when I will look at those other people and think, as I do with with one person whose name I won't mention for privacy reasons, but she's a lovely lady. She's just turned 100, and she walks up and down the corridor. So like just chatting away, and I'll sort of go in and see Yvonne, who is not half that age, but you're like not a million, so like nowhere near 100, who can't move, and can't walk up and down the corridor, and I just sort of, and those are the things that you sort of miss, and the connection back to the coaching and mentoring part is, just being open to allow people to talk about what is going on for them if they want to, and if they don't, just let them know that, look, if it's not, if there's something you need to talk about and it's not me, just find somebody. It doesn't need to be a coach or a mentor or a counselor or a psychotherapist. Just find somebody you like and just have a chat. Don't put any labels on it or anything that you need, and and work your way through it, and recognize that. So if you're feeling sad, anxious, and happy, sad, you're like whatever it is, it's an authentic and genuine feeling. It's not something to be shut down. It's your body saying that, look, we're feeling like this because.
Oh, David, what a story, and that those words is exactly what I hope our listeners will get from your journey with Yvonne, and the power of understanding and just recognizing what we need to do, and to talk and be communicative. But sadly, we are coming to the end of our time. I just again want to say thank you so much for sharing.
No, thank you for the opportunity.
And yes, please send all our very best to Yvonne.
I will do. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us on this episode of That's Life, or Is It? I'm Kerrie Dorman, author of The Life Stories of Jenny Lee, and the first one, published in 2025, is available through local bookshops and Waterstones, or indeed Barnes & Noble. If you have a life story to explore with me, please get in touch via the website jennylee.co.uk. Cha-ching!